All right, everybody, thank you. It's another exciting webinar from Sales Hacker. Very excited today to have you all with us. Also excited by these two gentlemen. We have a super major important announcement that has nothing to do with the webinar, but we'll get to Brian and that in just a minute. I think you guys will all be very impressed. And if this has anything to do with the kind of company he runs, you'll be super, super impressed with the way he works. But again, Richard Harris with Sales Hacker. Today's webinar is how to clone your star sales performers, a 4-step process. And I hear this all the time. How do I take, person A or B and make everybody just like them? And I think these two gentlemen have helped create this solution to make this happen. And it's a great topic. As always, we are recording the webinar, so it'll be available for you to go back and listen to or forward to other people over time. And of course, as you have questions throughout this webinar, please ask them during the session. We'd love to get questions and make it interactive so it's not the three of us doing all the talking. We'd love to hear your questions. You're welcome to go into the question box and introduce yourself, the name of your company, how big your team is, or maybe just a general reason why you decided to attend this webinar, because it just helps us stay aligned and on task with what we want to do. Without any further ado, I do want to introduce first, we'll start with Jake. Jake Sheffrin, who is the Director of Sales Development at Discover.org. Jake, you've been there a good bit now, and you are just crushing it over there from what I understand. Everybody loves you. You built that SDR team. You're a deadhead, minus the hair, the long hair, I should say. And we're glad to have you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Richard. Ironically enough, when I started at Discover.org, I think 3.5 years ago now, give or take, I had the hair to go with it. So.
Oh wow, nice. So you've grown up, from what I hear.
Sure, we'll put it like that. That's a good way to put it.
At least your parents like it, right?
So. Yeah, that's true.
That's great. And now I want to talk to Brian and Jake. It's not that I don't want to talk to you, but Brian had some amazing news today. Co-founder of Ambition. It's probably, I would guess it's more exciting than raising a round of funding, but it's probably could feel like that too. So Brian, why don't you tell everybody what's going on with you today?
Yeah, it's been a fantastic day for me. My wife and I gave birth to our second son about 23 hours ago, actually. So yesterday was an exciting day. It was a long night. I could not be more proud of my wife. I'd give her a huge shout out, but unfortunately, for all of us, she's probably not going to watch this, but she did amazing. Our son is doing amazing, so I'm thrilled to still be here. But it's been a hectic, day or so.
We really appreciate you making it and the dedication, and please, you know what? Thank your wife from us to let her that we appreciate you being able to show up today, because that's huge, dude. That's really awesome. And can you share name or size or anything? Can you give us sort of the rundown?
Yeah, so he's, I know this is not, pertinent to the webinar, but he's a few weeks early. He's about 6 pounds, 9 ounces. His name is Charlie Trouchold. And yeah, my wife is, I was like, I have the Sales Hacker webinar today. It's like a huge deal. I got to run back to the office real quick, which is like 10 minutes away. And she's like, you can't do that. I said, look, they told me, there's all these people subscribing. It's a great topic. So yeah, it was our first debate of Charlie's life about the schedule, but I think I won technically. I may have lost when I get back.
All right. Well, hey, dude, congratulations to you and your wife again. We're glad you made it. If you don't know Brian from Ambition, he has really helped, I think, facilitate the appropriate way to make people accountable, whether they're managers, leaders, CEOs, and reps. How do you make people accountable and do it in a meaningful and fun way that's not, Big Brother watching over you? So big fan of the space that Brian's in. So thank you. All right, so let's go from there, right? Let's just go ahead and start. And I think the biggest question is, before we start with all the things you should do, what mistakes have you guys made in building sales teams and trying to clone reps, or what got you to this point?
I can do that first if you'd like, Brian. So I think for us, there was a couple things, and the first of which is somewhat ironic. When I think back to when we first rolled out the sales development team and really started to scale, it was somewhat of a wild west type environment, right? There was no great direction as far as who we should be calling, when we should be calling, why we were calling. It was just kind of mining whatever we had in our CRM and hey, go nuts and, book as much as you can. The irony, of course, is that's precisely the problem we solve for our clients. But then the second piece, and I think this is where kind of Brian and Ambition come in, is what we were looking at. I think perhaps we were looking at our data and our metrics through the wrong lens. And what I mean by that is this. I think there's, the obvious things that we were looking at, and that was help dictating our decisions, whether it was demos per day or dials or what have you. But then we started to look at things like, the meeting show rate and, okay, of the meetings that we set, how many were actually, showing up. But then it was what was simmering beneath the surface that I think we went wrong in the mistake that we made early on. And what I mean by that is this. Is we didn't necessarily look at the leading indicators. So example being the days out between when the demo was set to take place, or excuse me, the days that we set a demo and when it was set to take place. And when we kind of honed in on that metric, that's when we could start to refine and fine tune. So I think, those are some large mistakes that I wish we'd figured out sooner rather than later.
That's great. That's great. How about you, Brian? What mistakes have you made along the way that's helped you solve these problems that we're going to talk about?
Yeah, I think we made all of those mistakes, and those are some of the biggest ones structurally, I think, that Jake just mentioned. As a founder, I think one of the things that we ran into over the last few years was what works for founders, what works for the really early team members, doesn't always work again. The market starts to change, the scale of your team changes. So the approach can't just go from Wild West, like you said, Jake. It has to become structured. There has to be what I would call like scheduled and process follow-up throughout. And you can't just expect the same results that when, myself or my co-founder Jared called and say, hey, I'm the co-founder of this company. I want to talk to you, VP of sales or head of sales development, because I know that we're going to be able to solve problems for your business. Unfortunately, that doesn't carry the same weight when, a new young SDR calls and has that same conversation. It's just different. And we didn't necessarily prepare those people for how that would be different. We sent them in there a little bit unprepared and unarmed for that. So that's one of the big mistakes that I look back on and think, man, we could have done a lot better early on if we had followed up on that piece, putting the right process in place, and then doing a much better job of not wasting our time. I think we wasted time setting up a lot of meetings with companies that we should have known were not good fits, or with people that would not be passionate about what we were selling. And we just, we are putting a scope too wide, or we were casting a net too wide versus being really, really hyper-focused and then being able to provide value in the first, 30, 90 seconds of a call, because we actually understand the problem someone is facing when we talk to them.
I think that's great. I think the thing I'd piggyback off of you, Brian, on that is that, and this is my advice to everybody who's listening, is when your CEOs and co-founders get frustrated that the sales team can't have as good of a sales call as they can, they're completely forgetting the fact that the value of that title of co-founder and CEO brings, right? And it doesn't mean that Brian walks in with an ego of I'm a co-founder or a CEO, but there's an intimate trust and an inherent trust when those titles walk in the door with your prospects. And when I see companies starting to clone, they're like, well, I was doing this. Why can't my reps do it? And it's like, because they don't have that legacy. They don't have that luxury. They don't have the title that comes with it. And it makes it a little bit tougher. And so I think, as you guys have described, you got to have to sort of start to nail down, well, what's the better process to make these things happen, as much as it is, who's doing it. So thank you for both for sharing those. So that's just something I've seen over the years. So for those sales leaders and managers who are running into that, go tell your CEOs and co-founders that Richard Harris and Jake and Brian said that they've got it all wrong. And that way you don't have to be the bad guy. Make us the bad guy. We'll take care of it for you. So anyway, let's go forward. I know we talked the other day, we talked about this bell curve that we were talking about when it came to performance. So why don't you guys, I'll let you guys decide who starts it off, but talk about what this means in relation to trying to clone your best performers.
I can start here again.
Yeah.
So I think the bell curve kind of speaks to, where your reps live, kind of the best, the middle, and kind of the bottom. I think what was interesting about this, when I kind of started to analyze it and think through it, is where the time is spent When I think of kind of like a sales pipeline and, where the individual contributors perhaps are spending time throughout the day, it's, the whole 80-20 rule. 80% of the time is spent in the top 20% of the ops or what have you. But I think, at least from my perspective, I almost flip that, right? Where when I think I want to spend my time in coaching and development, it's the majority is going to be kind of in that middle pack, right? So it's almost like the top 20%. Yeah, of course, we're going to spend time with them and coach them and learn from them, quite frankly, but those are different conversations. The vast majority of the time in development and training and really kind of fine tuning and refining, that's going to be in that 80% kind of the average, right? The peak of the curve.
Makes total sense.
Yeah, absolutely, Jake. And we've done the math on this, and we've looked at companies where the exact same phenomenon happens. You want to get out in front and spend a lot of time with your top 10, top 20% because it's fun. Those are the people who are killing it. They're throwing up insane numbers, and everyone's kind of making a star out of them, which is great. You want to really recognize them and put them up in front of the org. But I tell people, like, how much time does LeBron James need to be coached? Like, LeBron James is kind of doing his own thing, right? Like, it's the other people on the team who really need to be, I would say, optimized for the role they're playing around him in basketball, which is kind of ideally a 5-man sport at the time. And so, the exact same chunk in the middle of this bell curve we're looking at, just a little bit more effective, a little bit more productive. You've got a lot more room to grow and increase productivity than if you spend all your time or 80% of your time with your 1, 2, 5 stars, because they're probably already exceeding expectations, and there's only so much more you can get out of them, hypothetically.
Yeah, although LeBron does need a little bit of coaching on sharing the ball, kind of like Kobe, but that's a different
Absolutely.
webinar. I live in Northern California, so I'm a Golden State fanboy, right? So, but I think your point is well made. You need to spend time with different people in different ways, right? I think you can spend time with your star players and coach them in a different way of maybe being a better leader, being more supportive. But you're right, you're going to get the most lift out of that 80%. So I completely agree with you, Brian. How do you identify the top performer, right? Like, how do you even do that? Like, what metric are you using? Is it revenue only? Are there different types of top performers? How do you guys see it? And this time we'll let Brian go first.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is one of the things that shocked me when we started Ambition. And this is not a product plug, but we do something called Scorecards, and we'd go into a company to roll out and help them spin up, and we'd ask, what are you guys tracking people on? What are what's defined success for you? And they throw out one number. Typically it was like quota attainment or revenue or total dollars won. And a lot of times, like, if you looked at the role, especially folks who had sales development people, it could be 2, 3 iterations away from them, or kind of levels of distance from their actual. What we figured out was that oftentimes it's not just one metric. I think that it's great if your business is so clear and so crystallized that you can just say, here's the only thing you care about, go do it. That's just not the reality in most cases. So, I'm a huge proponent of what we call holistic metrics, or overall performance-based metrics. You see this in sports once again, like PER in basketball. Richard, if you're a Golden State fan, those guys are all just phenomenal across the board at every statistic. Football, you have QBR, which is kind of an overall weighted performance of quarterbacks, which kind of evens the playing field. So I really challenge sales leaders to look at what are the 3, 4, 5 key indicators that kind of funnel through my sales process or my sales development process, and then try to set clear expectations for each of those. Put a weight on what's most important. You can do this in Excel. You can do this on a whiteboard. And that's the number that I want to look at is who's overall consistently great, not just for whatever unbeknownst reason, who ended up with a great end of funnel metric at the end of the day.
Yeah, I completely agree. Jake, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think I echo Brian's sentiments there. Certainly for most organizations, there's the one or two key metrics or pieces they want to see, be it, revenue, be it close rate, whatever it is. But I think having a more holistic approach and kind of blending some of those metrics together is the right way to go about it. And I think too, there's the whole, like, the quantitative piece, right? Hey, here's the numbers. The beauty of sales and, for that matter, marketing, is there's a scorecard, right? Like, it's actually, you can see, where people are stack ranking. I think the other pieces to look at is kind of those qualitative characteristics. Amongst a lot of teams, you'll get a natural leader who steps up and people want to emulate. And I think if you can harness that and figure out, okay, well, what about this individual? Why are people drawn to that person? Is it because he or she is charismatic? Is it because they have a really good grasp on what you do and how to talk to people? I think those are the things you really want to focus on too. And that could be something like, hey, what's their ability to tell a story, or can they turn a no into a yes? And those things, granted, are more difficult to measure because they don't have, a nice dashboard I can look at. But that said, I think kind of having those two pillars is a really great way to figure out, hey, here's the top performers, and let's figure out what we can do to, again, kind of wash, rinse, repeat their whole playbook, if you will.
Yeah, and I love this slide here. This is that part where we were talking about, top performers apparently do something differently. And it used to be we didn't know what that was, right? That was the X factor in sales, or they knew how to talk the talk, or whatever it was. And in hindsight, it really wasn't, right? It's actually something very measurable. It's much more of a science than it is an art form, right? You can track these things about what they say, what they do, who they talk to. And this is, again, I know this is being recorded, but this is that slide where I tell people to pull out your cell phone, take a quick picture of it, because it's something you're going to focus on after this webinar. I think you're going to want to go back to this and create these columns for your team and your top performer and go, well, what does that person say? What does that person do? I know these are very isolated, or these are very sort of generic statements, but you need to figure out, well, how do they identify this decision maker? How do they navigate the org chart? Do they avoid single points of failure? How do they do that, right? You got to dig into what your top performers do at your org to make sure that you can clone that in your other reps. So again, I love this slide. It's one of my favorites because I think it's the essence of what we've all been trying to capture. And so I appreciate you guys putting that together. Are there anything that, as you guys look at this slide, Jake, is there something that, we do something like this, or this is exactly what we do, and here are 3 things we discovered, or here's a couple of things that you can maybe give people some real world tangibles around? And I'll turn the same question over to Brian in a second.
Yeah, sure. So again, without turning this into a product pitch for us, I mean, what I think our best reps were doing, we're leveraging the org charts that we had, right? Leveraging the data that we had, and then doing systematic call planning. And they would kind of pre-plan out what their talk tracks would look like for these different personas. So, a C-level exec would get a different pitch, if you want to call it that, than perhaps, someone on the front line. But then I think if there's a tangible takeaway, it'd be this. The top reps internally were doing this all at the end of the day. So they weren't spending the time in what I'd call the golden call hours of, okay, let me do my pre-call research. Let me, poke around the various sources that I have and figure out what I'm going to say. So instead, they were spending kind of the tail end of the workday doing this, getting their call plan for the next day and the next week lined up. So what we then did, or what we then implemented, is exactly that across the entire team, where the last hour of the day is now allocated to, cool, do your admin work, figure out who you're going to call, look at the org charts, let's look at the phone numbers, the email addresses, get your pitch dialed in. So then when you're coming in the next day, 7 to 8 a.m. every morning Pacific, we actually have a call blitz. No emails, no research, no chat. It's just get up and go. And that's something relatively new we've been working on. But I think kind of taking what the best people were already gravitating towards and then implementing that organizationally has been a huge lift.
That's great. How about you, Brian?
Yeah, I look at this and I think about the top rep, and just like we said, I believe a holistic performance metric is what's key, but it's how companies build that evaluation process into their coaching. And why I say that is, one of the biggest things that we see when we talk to people is whether they're misaligned in how much coaching time they're spending with top people, or they're not spending enough with the middle people, or they're spending too much with the bottom end of that funnel. They're not doing it in a consistent process and metric driven way. And so they don't have good visibility to what do the top people say, who are they talking, how are they navigating deals, because they're just talking about it in passing or they're talking about it inconsistently. So, when once again, I preach to sales leaders, make that coaching, that coaching motion repeatable, make it a program, have clear questions, clear metrics, and very quickly, I think in 4 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks easily, you can see, okay, here's what the top 3, 4, 5 people in a given part of my team are doing. Let me ask the question of, to a middle rep or a lower level rep, how are you doing these things? How are you prioritizing who to reach out to? When are you making your calls? How often do you follow up? Because now you've got data points, you've got a clear roadmap of someone who's doing it really well. And you can only do that by having, kind of a scientific process to coaching and a consistent process to coaching, and actually looking at the context, having a conversation with someone, and putting it together with the objective data. So, that's what I look at this. It's going to be different from every sales development org. It's going to be different from every inside sales org. But, if you have a standard kind of measurement and consistent conversation around it, you can very quickly figure it out and then apply that to the other groups within the org where you want to get people, more productive and more effective.
Yeah, I think that's great. And, it's interesting. You said two things that really resonate. One is it's different in every organization, but the one thing that's the same in in any organization, I think you guys alluded to it, is that there's a process, right? And a good buddy of mine, Scott Leese, wrote a sales book called Addicted to the Process. Successful salespeople is about being addicted to the process, right? And, I love that, Jake, on your team, you're setting everybody to go do that research between 4 and 5. That creates such massive productivity that we know is normally just lost to coffee breaks and foosball and ping pong, right? But when everybody's doing it together, then they feel like they're doing it as a team. And it's no different than if you said, okay, everybody, from 8 to 9, it's a stand-up power hour. You're just doing a research power hour, right? Like, I love that concept. I think that's really, really well done and well thought out. I got a question from Miranda in the office online, sorry. And, her question is, hold on, let me go back and find it because she said it's over about 3 times. How would you measure or create a baseline of activity around soft skills, the intangibles that are a bit more abstract? And I asked her for some clarification, and this is what she said in her world, which is, as a front funnel outbound SDR, how do you create data and measurements to apply all around pre-call research? If management only focuses on the daily activities, how do we get management to say, hey, you know what, you need to give us time to do this other stuff, not just this dials and emails and counting crap, right? So that was sort of I thought that was a great question, and I didn't know if there might be a slightly different answer based on how she asked it.
I can try. So it's an interesting question. I'll try to tell a story here, and hopefully there's some insights to be taken away. It's difficult to actually have like a numeric measurement of like the research time, for example, but in fact, right before we jumped on the webinar, one of our SDRs, in fact, one of our top SDRs, incidentally enough, he has this little hourglass on his desk, and it's a little plastic hourglass. And what he'll do is he'll actually time himself and the time that he's spending before he's just okay, on to the next call, on to the next call. Is he getting sidetracked? Is he doing too much research or what have you? In fact, I thought it was a great idea that I walked over to our events rep and said, hey, can we get these branded? Side note. But in any event, I think something like that, when you have like a true, physical item or something, and it's kind of everyone's cognizant of whatever it is, the soft skill you're trying to measure and keeping it top of mind, I think, there's some good takeaways and there's something advantageous in doing that. I don't know if that directly answers the question, but hopefully it's helpful.
Sure. No, I think that's great, and I think the thing is you've got to try different things and find different things. I know I did a webinar with a woman, what is her name? And she told me that one of the best ways to make sure you're doing some of these other soft skill things, or as well as hard skill things, is do things in 15-minute increments, right? Hey, I'm going to only spend 15 minutes on this project, And you'd be surprised that if you put down the phone and put it in a drawer and close every other window than the one window that has the email on it, you'd be surprised how fast you will actually write that email, right? Like, and I think that's a really great thing. Again, it's about the process and creating those kinds of things. Well, that's good. Miranda, thank you for the question. I hope we got to it. So let's move forward. What about the middle performers, right? So we talked about this one bucket of your top performers and what they're doing. What do you do to focus on these middle performers and try to get those performers to either mimic the top reps, or maybe you even use those to model your lower performing reps or newbies, because maybe the middle performers, aren't necessarily bad.
Yeah, I can jump in here if you want me to take it off, Richard. I think one of the things that folks have to do is, understand, once again, we kind of beating our own drum here, but like you have to have a baseline level of expectation for these people. And I think very quickly, one thing I hear when I talk to sales managers is we only hire the best. We only hire 5-star people. We only hire, the greatest talent of all time. And I love that. And you should tell your people that all day, every day, because they are fantastic and you want to love the people you work with. But let's be real. Like, they're all, like, if we took all the 5 million sales reps in the US, then they're probably average compared to everyone else. So you have to give them clear guidelines. You have to give them clear expectations, visibility into how they're doing. And I think it's a matter of, setting the transparency level in your organization a little bit higher and saying, here is what the great people here are doing. They are, setting up call blocks first thing in the morning. They're doing their research at the end of the day, which I love, Jake. Let's do a call coaching. Let's let them do a role play and see how much time are they talking on the phone? How much time are they asking questions versus pitching on the phone? And I think that you can start to get to some of these things that are hopefully obvious when you start to do a little role play and say, okay, let's pick a few. Let's not say I'm going to tear apart every single second of your 3-minute SDR call, but let's pick a couple high-level things that we want to hone in on. Let's compare it to what a person who we all agree is doing great is doing, and then let's practice that over a agreeable period of time. Hopefully, multiple weeks with consistent check-ins, because it's not going to be a one-call, hey, fix these 15 things, and okay, I'll talk to you next quarter. That's not going to change it. It's got to be a process, and it's got to be a collaborative process, in my opinion.
Yep. And those are great. And actually, I want to even pause a little bit, because let's talk about that for a second, right? Like, again, another great slide, pull out the phone, take the picture. These are great things, but some of this actually comes back to, do your managers have the skills to manage as much as, what should the reps be doing, right? Because, as you look at this, I'm a Gen Xer, right? And if I saw this kind of stuff when I was coming up through sales, that this is what my manager wanted to do, I'd be like, are you kidding me? Quit micromanaging me, right? And I think that in today's world, and it's one of the things I love about working with the younger generation, is that what I thought was micromanaging is actually coaching. And when I really stepped back from it, from my own perspective, it was like, I realized that I wasn't getting the kind of stuff that I wanted. I wanted the same things that the millennials and the younger generation want around coaching, but I just went to the school of STFU, get back on the phone and figure it out, right? So I love that this is there, but how do you manage your managers to manage this process, right? Like, if you're working with your managers, Ryan, right? You're the CEO now. You've got people beneath you, a couple of layers. How do you manage your managers to help make sure they're doing this stuff? And then I'll turn it back to Jake to answer the same kind of question.
Sure. So it's a good question. So when I first kind of started to move into like a managerial type role, one of the things that stuck with me, who's now our CRO, he told me, is people respect what you inspect, and it just stuck with me. Right. So there's a clear line of sight where the team and the middle performers and everyone, quite frankly, they have an understanding of what the managers are looking at. And to that point, the managers here every single day, at the end of the day, they send out a daily brief. And it's a notion of transparency where the team knows, hey, here's what we're looking at. Is it dials? Is it demos? Is it show rate? Is it talk time? Is it, whatever, is the accounts are moving along? they can see that. They can also see where they stack rank relative to their peers, right? Who are the top performers? Is there movement amongst the top performers? That's my favorite when I see, new people kind of jumping up spots. But nevertheless, I think if you're a CEO or a leader or what have you, I think if you can articulate clearly to the management team, hey, what are you looking for? And then have them have true measurements to that they can then display to their team, I think that's a big, big win.
That's huge. That's really, really great. Brian, how about you? How do you focus on getting your managers to manage this middle of the pack?
Yeah, well, I think, you manage your managers, which is a lot to say, exactly how you should be managing your reps or different departments in a company. And we deal with this firsthand in growing our business, but I love the last bullet point here, align goals, processes, incentives. For a modern sales organization, modern company today, it's all about how much understanding and how much buy-in do we all have on the goals that our team, the individual rep, have to go do. And I think you can't over communicate it, in my opinion. You can't be too transparent and say, okay, the company goal is X. To do that, our team of managers, 3 managers across our sales org, you guys have to go hit this goal. Here's how your pieces filter into the big goal. And then, at their level, I'm telling the managers, all right, you know your goal. Do the reps understand how they fit into it? Do they understand how their specific, the KPIs that we're tracking, whether it's daily, weekly, monthly, annually, do they understand why that matters? Do they understand, they need to do, let's just use 50 calls because they're only going to have 10 conversations because they are probably going to have 6 positive conversations out of them. So really trying to be overly transparent of like, we've got to put in the work because every single goal is a building block of what the company's trying to do. And I really believe in it. And I think that's where you get, quote unquote, the larger non-superstar performers really bought in is because you're making them part of the grassroots effort of the company, which is total alignment.
That's great.
To that point, if I may.
Yeah. Jump in.
Yeah, to that point, I think it's a great point, and kind of having the different building blocks of what the overall organizational goals are. So in those daily briefs, in fact, each team has a budget, and that's directly tied into what the company goals are and what their share is. And each individual rep understands, okay, here's my piece of the pie of that budget. And then throughout the day and throughout the week and in our meetings and what have you, we'll actually give updates. Hey, our run rate relative to our overall goal is this. And if we want to get to this goal, here's what we need to do. And we need every single person, getting this many of meetings or this many of wins or whatever. But I couldn't agree more with Brian's point that having that transparency is just absolutely huge, and it gets people bought in. And it feels like, hey, they're part of this, big team working in unison, not just, hey, I'm on an island here and I'm on an island here. I couldn't agree more. I think it's a great point.
Yeah, I think that's really good. We got a great question. I love this question coming from Pedro. What kinds of positive behavior is important to publicize and recognize? Now, Brian, I know how that works for you, right? Like that's, it's all of them and it's on a TV, right? But let's get a little more specific around that. It's a great question. I hope Pedro doesn't work for you and it's a loaded question. We'll have to kick you off the webinar. But what are the things? What do you find that people do appreciate getting recognition for, and what do you find that people are proud about, but they don't necessarily need recognition for it, right?
Is this coming to me?
Sure. Look, you're the expert. It's got to come to you.
One of the biggest things, and this has nothing to do with ambition of the company, but talking to people, what they love is when people recognize them for improving. So when they have a delta from a week ago, 2 months ago, when they started, whatever it is, and their delta is now increased, that's one of the biggest things, because it shows what people want to be recognized, I believe, is that they're working hard. They're coming in and they're doing the work and they're progressing and they're improving. Yeah, it's great that I made 100 calls yesterday. That's cool, but am I doing it better? Am I growing over time? Am I progressing? So, Pedro, if you can, and you can do this in Excel, you can do this in Salesforce, you can figure out a way to do it offline. Figure out how to showcase the delta and highlight people who are really increasing their ability over time. The other thing, and I always come back to this, but when it's possible, try to make it a team-based recognition, because our generation, and Richard alluded to this, hyper social, hyper, I would say communicable. We want to be in the know with our peers. And so anytime that you can highlight a team's effort or highlight a team's performance, one, it's going to push all the individual members next time to do a little bit more because they don't want to let their team down. And, you don't want to let your neighbor down. If you're in most of these organizations, we've got, a lot of SDRs in a room or a few rooms across the country. I don't want to let the person who sits next to me down to the person who rows away in the office. So I love group stuff. I love that peer-to-peer accountability and transparency. So those are my two things. Highlight the delta, recognize people who are improving, and then try to do things that are group and team-based because it means more.
Totally agree. Totally agree. How about you, Jake? What kind of things do you think the team likes to hear from you on? I don't know, do you give them plants since you're a plant guy? What do you?
Hey, they were gifts, to be fair. So there's two things. Yeah, I mean, look, we definitely highlight people who are just crushing their quotas and, killing in all the metrics. I think, too, though, whenever there's like a really interesting dialogue that happens back and forth, and whether that's, live on a call, whether that's an email, whether that's via social channels or what have you, we'll send that to the team saying, hey, check this out, and look how we implemented, a client voice here, right? And then we try to make it thematic such that there's a strong takeaway that people can go back to their relative desk and say, cool, like, she did this, let me try to emulate that piece. I think as far as a recognition program, one thing that we actually, will say, quote unquote, borrowed from one of the sales enablement companies out there is we have what's called a milestone program. And this is fairly well institutionalized within our company, with our team, that at certain milestones, be it revenue, be it sets, be it what have you, they get different things and they escalate in value. So one of the ones that the team absolutely loves here is we have these branded pullovers, right? And they know that, cool, if you have a pullover, you've achieved this certain milestone. We do headphones. We actually do a watch, and that's a fairly big milestone. But I think kind of that social recognition, like Brian alluded to, is really, really strong. And I think the other piece we'll do is, yeah, we have our internal like listservs, but for certain pieces of recognition, we'll actually CC our CEO and our CRO and our VP of sales and other these leaders, and just having like that moment in the spotlight, it's so valuable for the SDRs, and you can like see them puffing their chest out a little bit more, when they're walking around the next day, and it feels really good when a sales leader or an executive says, hey, hey SDR, hey AE, good job on that. That was really cool.
Yeah, I think that's great. It's funny having this conversation. I remember being on sales teams and we would literally walk around our sales team saying we can't brag about our wins because it makes other reps feel bad, right? And it was kind of like, what? Like, that doesn't make any sense. So that was my generation, right? So thanks for pointing that out too, Brian. That I'm that much. Appreciate it. Let's talk about data and tools and training though, like, because this is where it really comes in, right? Like, it's great that we're talking about this at a hybrid level or a high level. Obviously, ambition is in theory, it's a tool, but in my opinion, it's also a part of the training because you can use it that way. How do you guys integrate these three things to improve success?
Yeah, I mean, it's critical because, we've talked about the process, and Scott Lee's book, I think it's fantastic because it really highlights this as well. You have to have, and I love what Discover Work does. I love the peers in the community providing better data on the front end of the sales development cycle, who you're talking to, why you're talking to them, what's the problem they face. The tool set, I think now we're in a place where you've got, kind of where, how, why tools. That's how we think about it. Like, where does this data live? How do I access it? Who's going to be able to see it? How. We've got a ton of great tools. Probably never a better time to be a rep in terms of how I can do things, how easy it is for me to send multiple follow-ups or make a quick call or even send an automated, physical card to someone. I can do anything very easily. I think why is one of the areas we're still figuring out. Hopefully that's where we come in. But ideally it is to progress, develop, and really exceed expectations, not just at the rep level, but the team and as a company. And so, once again, going back to what I said earlier, it's really about trying to, I think about kind of, flipping this thing vertically and thinking, okay, do we have the data we need for people to be successful? Do they understand where it lives? Do they understand how to access it? Do they have the tools to to go do and execute on those things, you've got to have that, I still believe people can go sell with just a cell phone and they don't need a lot else, but if you've got tools, you're a step ahead. And then are you constantly reiterating what's working, what's not working, what can you do better, what is someone in the organization who's really doing great? And I appreciate you saying this, Richard, because yes, we build a software tool, we sell it that way, but we really do believe it's a mindset. And a mindset's a lot more powerful than a thing that you turn on and you have a great window in Salesforce. Building the mindset is how you actually get to a huge gain with any type of service. So, great question, but I think it's really having all of these things flowing and having a stack that you roll out to a new rep and say, here's how you go do it. This is the way, and here's why we're going to actually execute on it.
And we'll flip it to the other side, right? Because it all starts with good data. If you got crappy data, guess what? You're just getting, crap. So, Jake, that comes back to you and DiscoverOrg, right? But you guys, that it's not just about the data, right? It's about tools and it's about training and all those kinds of things. So, you've got the data side nailed, right? But there's these whole other two circles that we see on the screen. How do you guys sort of get all that to work together at DiscoverOrg?
Yeah, it's a good question. Again, I think they're not. I mean, clearly they're integrated, right? But I think the tools, if you put them only in the hands of your top performers and say, hey, go figure this out and does this work? Like, of course they're going to be able to figure it out, right? Like, they're your top performers. So I think it's kind of managing to the common denominator here. And that's what we strive to do is when we do our trainings, we figure out what tools we want to use or how we even want to tweak the tools we have in our internal tech stack. Perhaps the top performers come up with the recommendations and they kind of, find new ways to do it, and then we'll in turn train everyone else on it. But it's also important to make sure that, across the main playing field, everyone can in fact, do what you're training them to do, and they're well equipped to do so. I think too, back to kind of the ambition piece, I would say that's a data tool as well, right? Like that data is really helpful for a sales leader, and being able to look at that and kind of make strategic decisions, based on that data is definitely really helpful.
That's true. I had not thought about it that way. I think you're right. Great question coming from Chase, and I know we're not going to be able to show one at the moment, but maybe if you could describe it. And I don't know if Jake, if you do this too, but his question is, what's an example of a scorecard? What does that mean? Like, I don't know, you can whiteboard it out, or what's it look like, or
Yeah, so we have one we use for the SDR, and it kind of breaks down the anatomy of a call. So it's the introduction, right? Like, hey, did you say how have you been? That was a recent article that came out from Gong, which I love, changing the old, hey, am I catching it at a bad time, to how have you been? I love that. But it's the introduction, it's the pitch, it's the objection handling, it's the pivot, and it's the next steps. Like having like these very regimented like kind of pieces of a call, and then you're scoring accordingly on those individual pieces. Like, hey, your intro was really, really strong. Your pitch was okay. Fantastic job handling the objection. You kind of dropped the ball when it came to scheduling the next steps and having that absolutely nailed down. So I think understanding kind of the different, pieces of a call, whether it's a pitch, whether it's a demo, whether it's, whatever it is, that's how we do. And we actually do have a physical scorecard and a scoring rubric of 1 to 5 for these different sections.
Totally. And I'll jump in on that, Brian, before you answer. And I will say I do the same thing when people hire me to call coach. And it doesn't need to be fancy if you don't have something. And granted, you can always get something, but mine's just a good old basics. It's a Google sheet, right? And it's got the scorecard going vertically by rep, and I can score the rep, going one up and down. But then across, I can see what's trending through the team. Like, oh my gosh, everybody's forgetting to ask about next steps. I better make sure I talk about that in my next meeting or one-on-one, or, find out what's going on with the team to see why are we running out of time. Maybe it's not that they're not asking for the next steps. It's maybe they're running out of time because they're talking too much. Who knows, right? Just doing something is better than nothing, Chase. So I think that's a good place for you to start. But Brian, I know you talk about scorecards specifically as it relates to ambition. Can you talk a little bit about that without, again, it's not a product pitch. Someone asked the question.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, our philosophy is fairly simple, and our product makes it really easy to do. But we think about scorecards in terms of activity level, how folks are reaching their objectives, and how effective they are on both of those categories. So we're really thinking, immediate, short term, midterm, and then long-term out into the future, how effective are you and where are you going against your goal. So, scorecard for us, to use a non-ambition metaphor, I'll use an SDR metaphor. You may have a baseline expectation that people make 50 calls a day, have 10 conversations, and set 2 meetings for the AE team. Track that every single day. Look at how they're doing day to day. Look at where their peers are. At the same time, you need to look at the effectiveness. So if they are having 10 conversations and they're not setting 2 meetings, they're not converting. That's a point for me as a manager or me as a coach to come in and say, okay, why is Brian not converting the same as I expect or the same as everyone else? Same thing for long-term objectives. If people are supposed to do X number of pipeline created at the end of the month, or X number of close one business from their demo scheduled at the end of the quarter, be able to look at and see how important is that to me as a score. I think that's what scorecards do. You have 3, 4, 5 metrics, weight them accordingly, assign value for that, but give them visibility on day 1, on day 10, on day 30 of a quarter. How are they pacing towards that? Are they on pace? Are they off pace? Where do they stand versus their peers? And then use that scorecard to ideally set up a holistic performance score that you can use very simply to say, here are the folks who are killing it. I'm just going to go high five them or recognize them or make sure they don't have any blockers. Here are the people in my middle, called my yellow category. They need some help. I need to dive in and troubleshoot, figure out how to coach them up. And then you've got a group at the bottom that red, orange, whatever color coordination you want to do, who need more. Maybe they need to not be in the role. Maybe they need to be drastically changing how they operate. But that's what I look for with the scorecard. It's to make my job as a manager, instead of being a reporter, looking at data, doing analysis, it's giving me the red, yellow, green, and a quick feedback system to them so they can tell what they're doing and how they're pacing.
Great.
I think too, one thing to add, if I could, sorry, Richard. I think the nice thing about the scorecards is the self-coaching and self-analysis. Like we encourage actually peer-to-peer coaching back and forth, right? And most, or a lot, I should say, are kind of their own worst critic. So they're going to score themselves actually lower than perhaps you might have. And I think there's something hugely valuable in having kind of the peer-to-peer coaching. So it's not always coming from the top down, but it's coming, from their colleagues. And it kind of creates, back to what Brian said earlier, this collaborative environment where everyone is kind of, raising the watermark higher and higher and higher in unison, not just one person pulling up the rest.
Completely agree. I love anything that can help make the teams. I think we talked earlier about everybody's accountable, right? And any data we can give people that helps the manage the rep, that helps the rep manage themselves, I think is really, really good. In some cases, the reps can use the data to manage their managers and say, hey, look, this isn't working, right? It can go back the other way. It's not all just downhill, right? Well, we talked about the top performers. We talked about the middle performers. Well, let's talk about the underperformers.
Yeah, this is a fun one. I say that jokingly.
Yeah.
So I think that the thing here, at least for us, is understanding why they're underperformers, right? And trying to do some sort of diagnostic piece first. The least fun part of the role, and I would think, any leadership role is, involuntary attrition. That's never fun for anyone. But at very least, it's understanding, hey, where have they gone wrong? And let's try to fix that and diagnose that, and then put together a clear path forward saying, hey, let's agree upon this is where perhaps, I as a leader have done you wrong. Let's fix that. Here's things that you can fix. Let's agree upon, hey, in the next month, quarter, whatever the time dimension is, let's fix these things. Then you have agreed exit plan, if they don't do that. The other thing I'll say here is there is a time component, right? If your C players are going to become C- players, but your B players are going to become B+ players, you might be, frankly, better suited to spend time with those middle folks because they're going to drive more production overall.
Jake, what do you think? Or Brian, what do you think that?
Yeah, really quickly. I mean, I think it's it's never fun to spend time with the lowest performing people, but I think it's solvable in a few very quick ways. One is, are you from day one giving them visibility to what they need to do from a metric standpoint, from a goal standpoint? how often are you talking about it? Make sure that no one should ever be surprised if they're being let go or they're not hitting the number. It should be a long sequence of things have not been going well, progressing well, and that gives you a lot of opportunity. Hopefully, if you're coaching, if you're managing people, to course correct. You want as many opportunities to course correct and say, look, we didn't do it this week. How can we do it better? Let's start with the easiest things for you to have what I call like authority or actual, you can actually change as a rep, whether that's picking up the phone, whether the email, whether that is doing a little bit more research. Let's start with the areas that you have agency. See if that can improve. And then week to week, you've got to have what I call a metric-driven conversation with someone to say, did you do this? Did you do this? Did you do this? If no, we need an action plan. We need to talk about it. And every organization, once again, is different. It's a low unemployment environment out there, so you don't want to lose people. But at some point, if people are failing to hit the action plan or failing to do the baseline, it just doesn't make sense to spend more time with them.
Yeah, and I completely agree. And by the way, I'd like to flip this for the managers who are listening, is that you're actually doing everybody a favor when you get rid of someone who's not performing and you've done your job to try and coach them, right? You're not only doing yourself and your org a favor, you're doing a favor for that person, right? Because you're saying, look, you need to go find what's going to make you the best you. Because, no matter how much they like Discover Org or Ambition or the people here, if it's not the right fit from a business side as well as the cultural side, it's okay to say that, right? And our goal particularly is to figure out, well, how do you find the best you? And I say this a lot to managers, particularly new managers who aren't used to this, is that, to the Brians of the world of that generation, you guys are 20 something or early 30s. Nobody's going to care in 10 years. Nobody's going to, no, it doesn't matter, right? You get to control your LinkedIn profile. Like it's different, right? Don't worry about that. Coach those people. When you do have to coach them out the door, hug them out the door in a way that says, look, you're going to go find a better you, right? I'm sorry that this is disappointing and I don't like it either because I'm a human too. And, we've done all we can, but, it's not all bad when you have to sort of let go of the low performers. If you've done your job right, if you've at least made the attempts that Brian and Jake are talking about, I think you're solid. I think you can say those things with heart and meaning and care, which I think is the piece that matters most when you do have those underperformers. I'd also like to make sure too that we didn't even talk about this, but let's talk about some people are underperformers, not because they're underperformers, but because they're new, right? They're newbies. They're not ramped yet. So we didn't even talk about this in the pre-call, but let's talk about those people. What do you do to take those people who are new and try and get them up as fast as possible to that mid-level or to that top tier? How do you do that?
I think you look for little wins, right? Like you can't expect them to be at the same production level as someone with a lot of tenure, but it's look for these little wins and kind of build them up and build them up and build them up. And when they do something right, great, acknowledge that, recognize that, have them do it again, and then naturally or hopefully naturally kind of their skill set will evolve over time to kind of be all encompassing and be able to compete head to head with someone who's been here, or been there, twice or three times as long.
Great. How about you, Brian? What do you guys do for your newbies?
Yeah, well, Warren Buffett has a great quote that I'm going to botch, but it's, he doesn't look for high bars to leap over. He looks for very small bars that he can just step over. And that's the exact same thing that Jake just said. Give people small bars, short bars that they can step over and very visibly. So, at Ambition, the first 4 weeks, highly scheduled, who you're talking to, what calls you're going to ride along on, what type of things you're going to shadow with, what type of things you need to do yourself. And I think you should empower people as much as possible to report back what they're learning. Okay, I heard this thing on a call. Okay, I saw that this, fantastic rep just did this on a demo. So give them the, authority to tell you what they're seeing so that you can say, hey, actually what I was hoping you would see is this. And then you set clear metrics and, clear objectives, whether that is very fast paced and some people say, I want you spun up in 30 days or, maybe more millennial orgs. I see people who are like, we've got a 6-month ramp. Whatever you want to do, that's okay, but be clear and give them very visible guidelines that they need to go graduate through to then be held to the same standard as someone who's been on our team is fully ranked.
Yeah, and again, I think that's solid. I'm going to rush us a little bit because we're getting close to the end of the hour, but how how do you measure the success and make the team accountable, right? Like that's a very, very good question. How do you guys look at that that could be back to that holistic piece?
Yeah, for us at Ambition, and what I think we emphasize in the community is, set the org goal, and the org is typically the company. From a sales organization standpoint, go and give the new business goal, give the upsell goal, give the the different goals for different product units if you have that, and then break those down into levels that are applicable on a daily, weekly level for your reps. And I think that, Jake said this earlier, and I really believe in it 100%, that people are their own harshest critic. People are going to be their own harshest, scorer, if you will. And so if you're making it mega clear that this is the reason this is important to us, the reason is X, tell them day one, talk about it weekly, talk about it monthly. They're going to buy into it. If you want them to, if that's the type of person you want on your team, they're going to buy into it. If not, that may be someone who's not ready to be part of your team.
Yeah, picture kind of like a thermometer, right? Where it's like, you can see kind of the progression over time, and they understand that, look, you're not going to feel the whole thermometer on day one, but it's, constant and steady action that, gradually, you're going to get there and meet and then exceed.
Cool. Awesome. We got one last question. Then I want to talk about an ebook that's available for folks. But this comes from another guy by the name of Jake. And Jake, this is for you. So I'm wondering if it's loaded, and I'm going to go check on LinkedIn to see if this guy works for you. But he said, and Brian, chime in on your team too. But what's the one thing that Jake has done to make Discover Org stand out as such an efficient sales machine? Right? What's the one thing you've done, Jake? What do you say it is? And do you know who's asking that question more importantly?
I don't. There is actually a guy on my team named Jake, so I'm wondering if he somehow planted this. I don't think there is one thing. Like, honestly, I just don't. Like, it's a collaboration. It really is. I think that, look, like Brian said earlier, I'd love to sit here and tell you, yeah, we only hire the best of the best, but no, we don't. I think, though, that admittedly, at this point, I'm probably too far removed from the actual like day-to-day and the process and like kind of the nitty-gritty in the front line. So it's kind of trusting the team. Like if they have good feedback, it's actually listening to that and then making changes accordingly. Some of the best ideas, quite frankly, and in fact, our entire workflow, like it's not something I like dreamt up one night. It's like the people who are on the front lines and who I rely on to make, to actually keep me employed, quite frankly, those ideas, I think, are kind of the best indicator of what you can do and where you can go. So I'd say, I guess, in sum, like, listen to your team and don't diminish what they say, even if, the knee-jerk reaction is to say, no, we have that figured out. There's probably merit in the feedback they're giving you.
Yeah, Brian, what do you think, right? What's the one thing, if you were going to say, hey, here's the one thing that's made us really efficient, aside from eating your own dog food, what is it?
Yeah, well, it's eating our own dog food. No, I'm just kidding. It's aligning incentives and empower people to go execute all day. Those two things combined will never lose.
Can you give an example of that? Like, I know people would love to know, oh, that sounds good, but what's that really mean, Brian?
In our case, we always are doing what I'm talking about here. It doesn't have to be in a product, but stating the company goals, stating the sub goals, breaking that down to a level people understand it, that makes they have agency over, whether that's calls, demos, etc. Continually talking about it, and then creating incentives for them to do that. And every incentive on a rep basis should make sense for the company. It shouldn't be a misalignment of, okay, we're going to go drive this activity for activity's sake. We're going to go drive this sprint for sprint's sake. No, does that impact the business? Does it get us to our goals? Do we all agree on it? Does it pass the litmus test? If yes, we'll incentivize. There'll be no cap on incentive as long as it's going to help us accomplish the business goal.
Got it.
That's good for sales. I mean, easy for sales.
That's great. And Jake, you're going to have to find out if that was Jake who planted that question. And
I'm really curious. I really am.
He owes me $5 and a cup of coffee if he did that to us.
He owes me 5 demos if that's the case.
Yeah, I know we're getting close to the end of the hour. I want to thank you guys both for joining us. Brian, dude, like, showing up within 24 hours of a newborn. Congratulations on that. That is way more important than this, but
Still got the
really,
hospital bracelet.
oh, nice. We are very appreciative of you taking the time out to do that. And again, please thank your wife. I know there's an ebook, and I can't remember which one of you guys is sending it. That's going to go out, right? So, oh, here it is. Moving the Sales Performance Bell Curve, right? So it's coming from Discover.org. And I think it's a really solid ebook from what I've seen of it so far. I think it's a great way for you to ask yourself the right questions you should be asking, or have your own management group asking. And so I think there's a lot of great information there. So please be sure to go check that out. Brian, do you guys have anything big coming up? Is there a big ambition roadshow coming out anywhere, or are you just going to parade the baby around in an ambition onesie?
Yeah, this is too good a PR. No, I'm just kidding. We're all over the place. We'll be seeing a lot of salespeople, I think, in Atlanta for the AAISP Unite conference in about 20 odd days. So love to see some of you folks there. But hit us on LinkedIn, hit us on Twitter, and obviously come to ambition.com. We'd love to talk to you.
Awesome. Well, gentlemen, thank you again for joining us and sharing this. I know this cloning the top rep is a big topic of importance. I know this one's going to get a lot of downloads and replays. So thank you all. And again, thank you for the audience for sticking around. We really, really appreciate it. And thanks for the thoughtful questions. We'll see you again next time.